Hi everyone, so today we're going to discuss about chemistry and how to revise effectively for your chemistry exam. But I'd just like to say, before we go into the chemistry bits, that the GCSE Guide YouTube channel has obviously gone through a bit of change. I've started these discussion videos, and so the subscriber change on the channel was it went down like quite a bit when I first started these, and I think I lost 50 subscribers and I gained 20, then I lost another 30 and I gained 40 back, and it was just really weird. I didn't know if the YouTube unsubscribing malarkey was having an effect or whatever, but it seems to have stabilised now. Like in the past couple of days I've gained 50 subscribers and it's on the up now, and there's not too many downfalls at the moment. So I'd just like to thank you guys for subscribing, and I hope you enjoy the content, and there'll be plenty more videos coming out, mainly twice a week now. If not more, depends on my lecture schedules and things like that at uni. I'd also like to apologise in this video if my voice sounds a bit weird. I had a really bad sore throat and the fire alarm went off last night at 4:30, and so I've had about 5 hours sleep as well. So I'm feeling rough today, guys, but that's enough about me though, so let's crack on and have a look at how you guys can effectively revise for your chemistry GCSE exam. I've already discussed biology in a previous video, and I was saying how biology is the wordy science. It's a bit hit and miss sometimes. You don't know if what you're putting down is exactly right, it's a bit wordy. And I think chemistry and physics fall into the opposite category. I think as chemistry and physics, mostly physics, but chemistry falls into it as well, that they are a bit more mathsy, they're a bit more methodical based sciences. In chemistry, I think there's a lot of processes and a lot of routines for you to memorise and know for your exam. So not to mention the reactions you have to know, but also the tests you have to know for certain substances. You've got all the different processes such as making water potable and safe to drink, extracting metals. You've got the acid-base reactions, how acid and bases react with metals. You've got trends in group 1 and group 7, which is all how does it increase and decrease down a group and the reactivity and things like that. And so there are a lot of different things you have to know, a lot of trends, a lot of routines, and a lot of like methodology and things like that in chemistry. It's almost as if you're saying, well, this one thing is this, and then this thing leads on to this, and this leads on to something else. And so a good example is if we have a look at the trends in the group, and now we should know that the reactivity of group 7 decreases down the group. Now, you need to understand why this is, and you need to understand what reactions occurs and how these reactions differ because of the different reactivities, and everything leads on to something else. And that's how I see chemistry, as being mathsy, a bit methodical based science. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that biology isn't methodical in any way, but chemistry is more so. So in the biology video, I gave you a scenario where I was back in December, what I would do to revise for my mock exam in January, and then the progress from going from my mock, going through to revision, and then that month before the exam, and what I do the week of the exam or whatever. And so I decided to take a different approach for this video, mainly because you don't want me to say the same things. And so I'm going to focus on what to do in your actual revision sessions, so then 20 minutes, 30 minutes that you're doing revision for, what I would do for chemistry, and how this can relate to other sciences, because all these methods can apply to the other sciences. It's just the chemistry specific things I'll sprinkle on top of the basic ideas. So in this video, I will focus on the revision notes and what to do in your revision sessions. Let's say you're going to take a chemistry topic and you're going to do it for a solid half an hour. What are you going to do in that 20 minutes? Well, that's entirely dependent on you. Now, you can either, if you like writing out notes, you can do that in that format, bullet points, mind maps, whatever works for you. If you want to watch a couple of videos on it, go online, do an interactive activity, things like that, just different ways for you to experiment and see what works for you. Personally, as I'm sure you know, I refer to my revision as the boring revision because I didn't enjoy doing revision notes. The way I worked was I would read my textbook or my notes, I would highlight, make notes on them, giving extra information. Some people enjoy putting sticky notes on them, and so that could work for you as well. And if you're getting stuck in your ways, so for instance, if I got bored of writing notes, then I'd go and watch a video, or I'd try something else. And there was actually one point, I think it was in my second year of my A-levels, where I felt I was struggling really hard to actually revise. I wasn't motivated, I wasn't motivated, I didn't feel up to revision at all. And so I tried actually going in and making a couple of PowerPoints for some topics, see if that helped me out, and it did. That seemed to get me back into revision mood, and I could carry on doing my usual routine then. One thing that might work for across the board in science is if you make like a sort of summary sheet. So you had all the information for one topic on one A4 piece of paper. But what information should you include, and what information should you be revising in these sessions? For chemistry, it's quite simple, and it can be easily broken down into separate sections. So first of all, you're going to have to know the words, you're going to have to know the routines, you're going to have to know the methods that are involved in each topic. But then on top of this information, you're then going to have to know the equations, you're going to have to know the reactions, the tests that you need in each topic, and you're going to have to know the required practicals. Let's have a look at that information wordy section first, and what you could do to help you out, and what you could do in your revision session to do with this. So if you are the type of person to write out notes and do a mind map, then you could have one branch in your mind map, you could have a box and a piece of paper, and then say, right, this is the process I need to know. Let's say, for example, you're doing potable water, then you can say like step 1 is this, step 2 is that, or bullet point it out in clear indication steps that this is what I need to know for the exam, this is my core knowledge. Then for other topics, for instance, when you're extracting metals, you can write out the method, how to extract aluminium, how to do this. You're also going to need some consequences of this, be able to evaluate certain things. And so if you need to do that, then you can have branches off that, where you could have sticky notes and stick on there and say, oh, the positives and negatives, the disadvantages, advantages, and that way it's like building on your core knowledge. So I've got this core knowledge, and then this is the extra stuff I need to know on top of this. Likewise, if you're in the textbook, you can annotate information if it's not sufficient. So if you've got more information from your notes than in the textbook, then write in the textbook, highlight it, it's your textbook, use it. And that way, that means when you're revising and you're looking back on these notes that you've already made, then you're able to go, right, I need to know this additional information too. So it's about building on that core knowledge and making sure that you can go to one place to get all the knowledge you need to know. I find revision much easier when I'm able to either go through one textbook with all the knowledge there, or go through one revision, one set of notes with all the information there for one topic. Right, let's have a look at that equation bit and what you can do to help you out in learning all them equations you're going to have to know. My first point here is absolutely crucial. Now, check your specification. This is absolutely crucial because you're going to have equations for a lot, and I mean a lot of topics in chemistry. So you need to go on, check the specification for your exam board and see what equations you're going to have to know for the exam. Now, your specification might say you need to know the word equation, you might need to know the symbol equation too, you might need to know some ionic and half equations if you're higher tier. So you need to make sure you check your specification, because if they're not in there saying you need to know, or the equation isn't in there in some format, you're not going to be tested on it in the exam. Some equations which are not in the specification strictly, so they're not strictly there in their format, they might come up in the exam in, they might give you the equation, ask you to balance it, or give you the equation, ask you to do some working out with it, but they can't ask you to write out the equation if they haven't specifically asked you need to know this equation in the specification. So this means now that it can differentiate between the equations you have to know and the equations that you just need to know of, and you can prioritise your learning around that. If you're going to learn an equation, the way I would do it is first of all put it either at the bottom of the page if you're making a note, put it on a sticky note, put it somewhere explicit so you can see it. And what I would do is first of all write out the word equation, so something like this. Then I would write out the symbol equation, balancing it and including state symbols like this. And of course, if you're higher tier and you have to know ionic and half equations, then do whatever suits you. You could put, if it's an electrode, then you can put the ionic equations by each electrode on a sticky note, or you could just highlight it in the book, you could have an extra branch off on your mind map, whatever suits you. So what about reactions and tests that you need to know? Again, check your specification. Does it explicitly say you're going to have to know it, you're going to be tested on it? And then for your reactions, you're going to have to know what, of course, is reacting, what the products are, and the observations. So if you're reacting two substances together, then what's the colour change, what gas is produced, what can you see, is it effervescence? It's my favourite chemistry word. Make sure you know the observations associated with those particular reactions. Likewise with tests, you're going to have to know the method for the test. So do you add an acid first and then something else, or do you go straight in and add this substance? Then what happens in the test? So is it a colour change from what colour to the new colour? What gas is produced? And you're going to have to make sure that you know what a positive result is and what a negative one is. So if the colour change in a certain experiment goes from orange to purple, say, then if that doesn't occur, it's a negative result. If it does occur, it's positive. And so things like that you're going to have to know. It's up to you, obviously, how you set it out in your revision. Just make sure you get it in there somewhere. Right, and now the final point is practicals. And so obviously in each science now you've got practicals that you're going to have to know. You're going to be tested on in your exam. Some exam boards still, I know WJ still have the practical exam as a separate unit, whereas some others such as AQA just have them involved in the actual exam. So obviously I would still recommend to learn the practicals for your actual exam as well, because it's inevitable that you're going to actually get some questions based off them. Although they've got a separate unit and whatever, you're still going to get questions on them. So I would include the practicals at the end of each topic, so whatever topic they relate to, write out the practical and just almost write out a report for that practical. So what's the method involved? Pick out the key things. So do you weigh the product in a certain way? Do you have to prepare a sample in a certain way? Because those sort of key ideas around the practical might come up in a different format in the exam. So say you have to weigh the mass of a substance out in a particular way, that might come up in an industry format in the exam. You just don't know. So obviously with each practical you're going to have the method, but it's also things like, do you know what the variables are? So the control, dependent and independent variable. Do you know how to do the risk assessment for it? Do you know the difference between a hazard and a risk? So all this is going to come in your revision, and the more you put into your revision notes, the more you're going to get out of them in the long run. Now, ideally, what you want to do is that once you've made these notes and you've gone over them a couple of times and you're pretty solid in this topic, you know sort of almost to the knowledge, you're pretty confident in it, then you're going to want to try and sort of reduce the amount of information you start off with and try and complete the unit. So let's again, potable water, let's take that. I keep referring to potable water because it's the unit I've done a couple of days ago for the GCSE guide. And so let's say we take potable water and we've written out these lovely revision notes, very detailed. Then each time I go back and revise, I'm going to want to try and reduce the amount of information I start with and complete the knowledge I know. So let's say I've gone over my notes a couple of times on it, I'm feeling pretty confident, and so what you're going to do is, instead of revising just the notes, you're going to start off with just the titles for each stage. So stage 1 is removal of this, and explain each stage in detail. Rather than starting off with the whole knowledge, then you might start off with just the titles for each stage and try and complete the information what goes on in them stages. For your equations, you might get rid of a couple of reactants or products and say, right, finish that off. You might try and start off with the symbol equation and then try and balance it. And you can just reduce the amount of information in each section every time you go. And so even with the practicals, you could try and write out the risk assessment for the practical. You could try and write out the method for the practical and things like that. Again, I was pretty poor in doing this myself. I would literally read the textbook, memorise an equation, and then I say, right, I'm going to carry on reading the rest of this topic. I'm going to see if I know that equation at the end. And so even something like that, if you don't want to have to write it out, then you can just try and memorise it. You can try and think, right, do I remember that what I've just read? Do it come to an end of a page and say, right, what does that page say? Summarise it in your head almost. You don't have to write everything down all the time. And so obviously this is what I do preparing for my chemistry exam. As I get closer to the exam, I concentrate a bit more on past papers and making sure I understand the application side of things. And so, but this is what I do if I'm making revision notes for chemistry and how to make my revision notes effective, not only for chemistry but across the board. This can be applied to almost every subject. Just take your subject, break it down into what you need to know, what's the certain sections, what's the common themes in each topic, and then you can do this for almost every subject. That's everything anyway, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. Let me know down in the comments what you would do. Do you enjoy doing boring revision? I know I certainly do. I still do it now. So let me know down below.